We've talked a lot about the pandemic's effects on healthcare systems, workforce shortages, hybrid workforce, and evolving innovation. We've talked about the call for equity and access getting louder and louder, and health systems are taking real action to meet those calls. But another consequence of the pandemic, of course, has been an increase in cyber attacks. With all of the remote work going on, of course, there's a brand new set of threats and risks that we haven't always talked about in the past, but it's growing. So we're excited to bring you three people who are managing the risk really well and with a little bit of humor tossed in because we're talking about some very serious things. So let me introduce Michael Ebert of Guidehouse, Melissa Lawler of Hackensack Meridian, and Mauricio Angie from the University of Miami. I had a chance to speak with them earlier, and they really are the most fun security experts we've talked to in a while. Michael's going to lead us here. Michael, take it away.
Really want to thank Melissa Lahr and Mauricio Angie for joining us today for this discussion on cybersecurity. These are leading issues we're going to discuss around healthcare management and healthcare cybersecurity. We look at the changes in healthcare, much greater consumer involvement in healthcare, consumer engagement in our platforms, but we're wrestling with fundamental issues dealing with, IoT and Internet of Things and Internet of Medical Things. We're dealing with the cloud and movement to the cloud. So, and how we manage and secure those overall. So now let's keep this very free and very interactive. And let's talk about one of our first points, which is how we manage privacy and security with all these connected devices that we have in medical IT and other information, Internet of Things devices in our network. Melissa, Mauricio, who wants to go first?
I'm happy to start if Mauricio wants me to. Okay. So really, from a Hackensack Meridian Health perspective, the way that we're managing medical devices, IoT, is really how we're managing traditional devices too. We look at it at a purchasing level before we ever approve a purchase. We have a capital expense request that goes through a number of different channels, through purchasing, through legal, through IT and IT security. And when it gets to the IT security review, we look at the MDS2 forms, which are manufacturer device security forms, and they're standard. So it's very easy to ask a vendor, can you please produce the MDS2 form so that we can start to understand some of just the foundational security controls in these devices, whether it's encryption, can you do automatic log off? How are you doing backups? As HMH, are we allowed to scan for vulnerabilities? Are we allowed to patch? Is that the responsibility of the manufacturer? So we look at it at that level. And then if any of the MDS2 responses come back that don't meet our standards, or we do not have the ability to safeguard and control the device, we segment it to a separate VLAN on our network that has all of the sort of vendor VLAN devices.
We do verbatim. I mean, I think this is a book that has been written for years on the supply chain from the, even when they're thinking about one thing that Melissa is doing that she didn't mention, and I know we pretty much the same, is even when somebody's trying to purchase something, we get involved in that, in reviewing the, from before they buy to make sure that they meet our security requirements. So that's important. It's always important to see from the IoT side of the house, and we were discussing this a little bit, is this thing of the new generation of medical devices where you wear the wearables, or in the hospitals now, there's many IoTs that do not relate to patient directly, but they're patient care and patient safety related, thermostats, or even oxygen valves that we're now looking at. And when we scan our network with whatever tools we get these days, we're trying to identify and identify where our weaknesses are, per se. Didn't see it before because it didn't fingerprint an OS specifically. But same Melissa, we're doing in that regards.
And I would say too, You know, to Mauricio's point, at the foundational core, it's all around the ability to identify the asset, manage the asset, and then remediate any vulnerabilities associated with the asset. And I know, you know, I'm sure Mauricio can say the same thing with the Log4j 0-day vulnerability. I'm sure everybody in healthcare wishes they knew where all of their assets and applications were and what was subject to this vulnerability, because at least on our side, there's a lot that we knew, but there's also a lot that we're finding as we continue to do vulnerability scans and identify additional systems and applications that are now vulnerable to this.
What's the initial way in which you're fingerprinting your assets then? Is it through the vulnerability scan, or are you implementing other asset intelligence capabilities?
So from an HMH perspective, what we're trying to do, we're going to implement a network access control solution to assist with some of this, and then start from first a monitoring perspective and then move it into an enforcement policy. But right now we're really using, you know, some of our standard tools like our vulnerability scanning tools, our asset identification tools, where we use those to push software out to the assets, you know, and it can scan the network to identify any assets that have popped up in the last X amount of days. So that's really what we're doing right now until that NAC solution is in place.
Mauricio, how are you handling this situation?
It is very similar. We recently deployed a medical device management, you know, we did a POC. We like the POC. The telemetry we're getting for this POC with this tool is amazing. We're finding out not just, and Melissa made reference to this, the MDS2, very important, but what we're finding out and what the telemetry is providing to us is really more on is it vulnerable? Is it this releases? So we get telemetry and immediately an alert to say this device is vulnerable and there's patches out there for this. Or sometimes it says here is the report from the manufacturer how to fix this. So always fingerprinting. The other thing that we're doing in the NAC, in the network access controls, you know, we're fully deploying this right now, is medical devices. Now we're working with biomedical engineering, and every time they have a device that they're gonna plug in the network, they reach out to us before they reached out the destination. IP address, can you scan it? Is it okay for us to move forward? It's putting a lot of burden on my team, and I've heard my team saying it's becoming an issue. But I tell them, you know, we gotta do this before and not after the fact when it's already connected. So I'm gonna tie the first comment Melissa made. We're treating this as a regular device on the network, and we're doing the same security due diligence as we were with a workstation or server in the sense of the security controls.
And Mauricio, is this true not only in acute care, but in your physician practices and your specialty areas?
It's so it is, yes, it is. So the answer is yes. I sat this morning, we're opening a whole bunch of practices like everybody else in the healthcare industry. Right. And now we sit in this like never before, because I requested it. I said, you're opening practices. I need to go from a, you know, like if you know the HIPAA security rule, administrative, physical, and technical control. So I myself sit in this meeting and said, look, hey, where is this device going to be connected? Who's going to access them? I reach, so it is having the whole view. And then I assign someone from my team to say, here is the laundry list of things you need to be aware of before this practice opens. So it's to that level now. And I know, Melissa, you run a bigger operation than ours, but it's something that we're doing day in, day out now.
Yeah, and one thing I would say that Mauricio and I haven't mentioned, but I know we're both doing it, is that in the cases where we're sharing our data with third parties, and whether that's from, you know, a cloud perspective, whether it's vendors helping us for payment care, you know, treatment operations, any of that, we also have privacy and information security addendums where we outline our exact security and privacy requirements that we expect our third parties to have in place to safeguard our data when it's not within our traditional four walls. And that, at least here at HMH, is mandatory for any vendor or third party who creates, receives, maintains, or transmits what we consider HMH confidential or restricted data.
And you're flowing that from acute care down to physicians, down to the specialty operations and across the board as well.
In some cases too, where we have a physician agreement in place where they're not wholly owned by HMH. It could be a joint venture, for example. It could be a lease practice. They also have to sign our privacy and information security addendum.
Well, you're both also dealing with the academic issue as well as the research issue, because you both
Oh,
run
wow.
those. That's a
fun.
totally different story. So, Marisa, talk about the academic side and we'll get into that aspect.
Being a researcher myself, I understood when I got hired by Dr. Reese to come work for him. There's this thing about having a research background and being seen by the researchers as a peer, right? So that's different. And what we've been able to do is a lot of awareness. So I sit in committees with the research committees. I sit on the IRB now, because I want to create the awareness of you can't just go create a grant, buy equipment and plug it in the system. We have some guidance. The other thing we're reviewing is that the grants come, and now more than ever before, come with a requirement for a security plan or a security assessment, or we have to be aware of those. And we make all possible, we try to accommodate the researchers under the security, but they have to abide to our security policies. And sometimes it's been hard, but they're understanding more and more why we do it. And the more attacks out there, and the more we can show them, look, this is a ransomware attack, but this happened because a researcher did something. We try to bring it up to them so they see it. It's not easy. And the academic side, the freedom of information on the side of the school, per se, the students and professors, and HIPAA security rule is totally different, but we took a different approach. And we're working on at every level with administration, students, residents, everybody, on the importance of following security protocols. And the last thing we did, and Melissa knows this also, we're working together with the Compliance and Privacy Office. So every time we go into when I would talk about security, I bring the privacy officer with me or someone from their office to say that this is not just a security issue, it's a privacy issue. And the fines and the penalties are huge, but we're looking now at something very interesting, is the shifting of patient care and patient safety issues. As a result, we all aware, a baby died as a result of a ransomware attack. Unfortunately, that was the first death as that. So we try to do this ongoing awareness training together, but it wouldn't work without top support. And what I'm saying by that is our CEO is aware. He wants us to be out there. The board of directors actually asked if we're doing this. And so it's a joint effort. It's like security 101. If my CISSP, I remember, do you have policies, procedures? Do you train on it? We're trying to do that more and more today to kind of bridge that gap.
Melissa?
Yeah, I would say very similar to what Mauricio is doing. We are trying to work very collaboratively with our researchers. I will say that I'm not always their favorite person. HMH has implemented geo-blocking, where we have essentially blocked everything but 10 countries in the world. And that is very problematic for the researchers who have a legitimate business need to have to go to websites and other sharing platforms that are typically blocked by HMH. So we have had struggles at times where there has to be a balance between being able to be secure, but also allowing the researchers to do what they do best. And we are still working on that every day. Things pop up where they get a block page and we have to quickly revert that for them. But we are working to also build an environment for them that is a little bit more open and architected with research in mind, rather than trying to keep everything secure and finding that happy balance. That's not in place yet. We've had some discussions, and we've also engaged third parties who have a lot of experience in this area to help us so that we aren't impacting our researchers, but we're also not opening the floodgates of HMH and potentially putting us in a spot to have a ransomware attack.
Lisa, if I may, something I've been dealing with and writing about and my students, every time I start a new semester, the definition of information security or cybersecurity, and I'm gonna tell you what I've been using these days, and thanks to Dr. TJ, who was my professor in my grad school, and I say this, and it's important that we understand, security is a delicate balance between the risks and the controls that we place. If the controls are too stringent, the risk is mitigated, but the users may find ways to, go around security, right? So, hey, it's too stringent. You cannot let me do my work. So I'm gonna bring my computer from home, connect it to the network, and voila. Or buying a wireless card to connect to somebody's. But if the controls are too lax, we all know the security risk is high. I find myself as a practitioner these days trying to find that delicate balance between security and risk. And I'm not the favorite person. We're not here to, win the contest, but we are here to protect the organization against an attack. The other idea that I've been dealing around or going around and talking and thinking about, and I know a lot of you up there are gonna say, "Oh my God, what are you saying?" The HIPAA security rule hasn't been reviewed for a while. I think it's been last revision was 4 or 5 years ago. So I'm thinking about this. Is the HIPAA security rule now hindering patient care and innovation? And that's in my mind all the time with that delicate balance is the interpretation of the HIPAA security rule by Melissa may be different than mine, maybe different than other practitioners. So we gotta be very careful on your interpretation and the controls you want to apply and that delicate balance that I mentioned in the beginning.
I
Mauricio.
agree with you, Mauricio. And, the HIPAA rule was written by a bunch of lawyers, and we can have them to thank for why it's so ambiguous. But you look at some of these corrective action plans that are put out by OCR and HHS, and you read how they tie back the violation and to what citation within the HIPAA rule, and you scratch your head sometimes and say, how on earth did you tie vulnerability management back to this area of the HIPAA rule? So, it's just, it's always a guessing game, but I agree with you. It is a very fine balance that I think we strive every day to achieve. And some days we are off kilter, and we need to sort of right the ship so that we're not impacting our end users.
Right. That's correct, Melissa. I mean, you've got that experience having, been with, working with the OCR and as you guys know on the call, I was the lead partner on the OCR work to find the criteria by law, and it has to take contextual, as your vice president says, it's contextual application. It's based on the sophistication and nature of your organization, and their interpretation against that is sometimes over here because they didn't have that practical experience, healthcare clinician experience in the field of how it operates. And so they're trying to apply a law against how it really needs to operate in the area, and it doesn't always jive. So to Mauricio's point, I agree. I think there needs to be, they to do it via guidance to the industry from what they're learning, but they need to probably reconstitute that in a more practical manner so that it's more operational in nature. And that brings the next complexity is, as we do everything nowadays moves to the cloud, how is cloud impacting your environments, research, academic, and operational healthcare business practices that are using more and more cloud apps. A lot of vendor IoT devices have a cloud backend as well, and how you incorporate and address that into your environment when the tools today don't necessarily address cloud security.
Michael, I'll take a tab of that first. I think the cloud has been around for years, right? So we've been talking about cloud for years, and I don't think we fully understand what the concept until now. The big guys, the big names are coming out and telling us how to do compliance. By the way, I hear the big names saying, hey, our environment is HIPAA compliant. And I want to ask the question is, what do you mean HIPAA compliant? There's no such a, I really scream and they look at me like, okay, Dr. Angie, we understand, but there's no HIPAA compliant. The second thing is the approach we took is because we're, our strategy is multi-platform, multi-year, right? And so it has its all challenges to protect. What I'm telling my team is we didn't invent the wheel. We have tools on the arsenal of tools. If you want to talk about tools, because I like to talk about controls and safeguards. But one thing I looked at is, do we have audit logging and monitoring, robust logging and monitoring, access controls? And first and foremost is, do we know what we're using this platform for? And so that's the complexity. You understand, first and foremost, what is the business case? What platform are you using of the 3, 4, 5 big names? And then you build your program around what the business needs here is. Because we're no longer dictating what the users do. The users are learning and dictating to us this is centric focus on what the business needs and no more on what IT tells them to do. So it's evolving.
Yeah, and I would say on our front, any cloud environment that HMH architects and is responsible for, so all of our cloud tenants are built in alignment with NIST 853 moderate. So that from our perspective, any of our regulatory obligations, contractual obligations, we feel that NIST 853 moderate meets or exceeds any of those expectations. And so that allows us where, hey, what type of data are you putting in there? Why are you putting data in there? At least we have a baseline to say, if it's our cloud environment, we know it's meeting NIST 853. We've partnered very closely with our cloud architects and as well as some of our major cloud partners like Google, like Microsoft, to develop these technical design documents so that anytime a cloud tenant is spun up, we have the ability to implement all of these controls that we've architected. Now, on the flip side, when it's not a cloud environment that we're able to manage, that's where, similar to what Mauricio and I were mentioning before, we have those privacy and information security addendums that we put in place with our third parties to say, whether you're storing it locally in your data centers or in a cloud environment, this is our expectation for you. This is what you must do when you have our data, regardless of where you're storing it.
Melissa, if I may ask you a question, Mike, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Being that I'm a believer of NIST, ever since its inception in 2002 with Dr. Ross, we worked on this, we looked at this, we knew what we were looking at. But interestingly enough, I've been posed with a question, Melissa. NIST is not a prescriptive framework. So is it that we need to go with, HIPAA is require addressable control? I am same. We are using the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 853 and the new revision 5 on the 2 new additions, which is supply chain and vendor risk management, right? But I've been asked and kind of challenged on, it's not prescriptive. It doesn't say that you must do this. So how are you, this is interesting because I'm calling you on it, but how are you managing that when we're challenged about not prescriptive controls?
Right. So in our perspective, when we started looking at the HIPAA security rule and any other obligations that we may have, FERPA, for example, because we do have students and their data, we started to look at what is the minimum necessary and where do we want to be from a security program with our cloud environments. And I will say that once upon a time when I was working at KPMG, we had to develop a very large cloud environment within Microsoft that held over 180 million patient records. They grabbed CMS data and a number of other large data feeds. And so when we started peeling back those data use agreements, what it all ended up pointing back to was NIST 853. When you started reading those agreements in detail and looking at the regulatory citations that they used. So when we came over to HMH and we started to architect these cloud environments, we said, we know we're comfortable with this. If we ever got CMS data and had a similar data use agreement, we know this is their expectation. So why don't we just sort of bite the bullet and go architect it now that way? And it took a lot of time up front. It was not easy to say when we have a lot of people asking, where's our cloud environment? Why can't we spin it up? Now that we're on the cloud, it's supposed to be easy and quick.
Yeah.
And why can't we do it? It took a lot of time in the beginning, but it sort of paid off on the back end, knowing that we don't have to do any last minute configurations to these cloud environments. Or if we do, they're very minimal.
Same.
Yeah,
Good.
and we at Guy House have been talking about, and Mauricio, you brought this up. They say they're HIPAA compliant, and it's it is funny, it is a joke, and we keep on going, beyond compliance mentality, right?
Yeah.
There were 875 breaches last year, representing over 61 million health records, and everybody said, well, we were HIPAA compliant, but you got beyond compliance, right? Why are we having all these breaches? And we have to look beyond compliance. So, Melissa and I worked on that engagement together. So we agree, like you've got, and this 853 is a little more prescriptive. At least it gives you the dialogue to say, well, here's the requirement, and here's the things you can do, right? So it gives you a point in time, and by moving to that level, you look at CMS data, you look at research. When you get research grants from NIH, it requires this 853 moderate with 18 high controls. So as you move to that, and the new 5, they're actually increasing the number of high controls they want in that, and they said they're going to come out with guidance by the end of this year on all that. We need to have a common framework and apply that across all of our capabilities, whether it be cloud, whether it be on-prem, whether it be IoT, and how we treat it. It is an important component, because we need to go beyond what regular compliance to get past 61 million records being breached last year.
Right. Michael, there's another issue where we.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, let's be honest, the only people who can deem something HIPAA compliant is the regulators. And I don't think they're going around looking at cloud environments and giving a stamp of approval and saying, good job, guys, you're compliant.
But Melissa, we're as an industry, we keep on allowing the big, this is not, they did what we asked them to do. Microsoft, Google, AWS, they did what we industry said. If your environment does not meet the minimum security safeguards are necessary, I can't do business. So they went out and put this. But you see these salespeople telling you we're HIPAA compliant. When you challenge them, they stay quiet because they don't understand what you're telling them. But reality is that the regulator is not coming out and saying, hey, this is I certified. I wanted to touch base real quick. We started talking about IoT, and I'm gonna make a connection here with the cloud. A lot of these IoT devices are cloud-based. A lot of the data is, a lot of not, but probably most of them or all of them, they're cloud-based because that's what cloud allows them to do. And so I'm curious to see if we're the only one doing it or everybody's doing it too. When we are looking at these IoT devices or medical devices or diagnostic devices, when it's a cloud-based, we even go a step further and review the cloud-based, not just the security addendum, Melissa, which is really good because it protects us from liabilities, but we want to understand what that is. And you'll be surprised if you do that. It takes a little bit of time. Yes, Melissa, I know, but if you put the framework in front and then you just replicate every time, we found no security in some of them. We found the access controls, passwords never changed, admin passwords using in the background as a service. We found a lot of IoT devices. So now the vendors are asking us, do you know somebody who can help us with this? And I'm like, no, this is incredible. But all kidding aside, it's incredible what's happening. The latest of this is a research that some researchers were doing, and I got a chance to pick at some of the documentation and provide feedback. Is the concept of the body area network, our body area network. And now they're calling it WBAN. You can research it, it's fascinating. All these wearables, all these medical devices that we have, a pacemaker, BrainMate, now are attached to an IP address. Hospitals, some hospitals in the United States are trying to do proactive approach and to patient care. So these devices send a signal to a command center, very similar to a NOC or a security operations center. This device or this patient is having these conditions. The nurse is calling them already and say, you need to take your medication, you need to come here. Yeah. I didn't want to say the name. So it is so crucial that we understand how body area networks work, because now it's introducing a new level of complexity into our environments. So I welcome everybody to kind of look at this. It was a new concept many years ago, but it's a concept that is making, and I want to pick Melissa's brain, is how are you managing those now with all this complexity?
It's going to be a very interesting and fun challenge. So one of our hospitals is actually going to be a pilot for what we're calling HMH Hospital at Home, which exactly what you said, Mauricio, allows the patient to receive some of these acute care services from the comfort of their own home. And that's solely made possible by IoT, IOMT, these next gen capabilities for patient monitoring outside of the traditional four walls of the hospital. And so they get these wearable technologies where it can start flagging that there seems to be an issue, there's likely going to be an issue, and send it back to the hospital so that they understand, Melissa Lawler may be coming in shortly for a heart attack, or somebody better get her on the phone because we're watching her baselines change. And so it's going to be a very interesting pilot. And the hope is that HMH will roll this out across all 17 of our hospitals. But right now we've selected one to be that pilot program. And it just launched, I think the announcement went out this week. So it will be a very
That's what I'm saying. There's a
fun challenge.
So
yeah.
Melissa, congratulations on the innovation, but I wanna welcome everybody on this, on this broadcasting this webinar to look into this. These are things that are coming. They're here. We see it happening in the financial sector with fintech, as microloans and all these, and it's coming now more and more to patient care. And the issue is always in the back of my mind again and again. We cannot be hindering patient care and innovation. The HIPAA security rule needs to be revised. We need to make sure that the controls are there, but it's going to become more complex as we move forward to this new type of care for patient care.
Yeah, and the automation of patient care is a key issue. So an example is Gaius actually developed a radiology examination, X-ray and MRI radiation analysis process, so that it takes away from the doctor identifying a bleeder in the brain and other immediate abnormalities within any MRI scan, and present that. These are high risk areas, so the doctors can be more focused and therefore administer more patients per minute, right? Because that's where we're at. We're short on doctors, we're short on clinicians. We've got to automate the process, and we're doing this in through an artificial intelligence way. And now we're getting bots in our system and other automated routines, and we have to manage the security and access of those as well. How are you guys treating this type of technology? I know what we created for NIH is now being rolled out to several hospitals. But how are you treating this type of automated technology and its command and use of your systems?
So from an HMH perspective, we actually, and it's no secret, we have a partnership with Google. And so we're going to deploy artificial intelligence and machine learning in key clinical areas, especially around screening and detection, to help sort of transform the way that healthcare is delivered to patients across New Jersey and really the tri-state area. And some of the areas that we're using that AI and ML solution is to assist with the screening and disease detection, especially with COVID-19. How can we do advanced screenings, through this pandemic? They're also looking at sepsis detection, prostate cancer screenings, mammography screenings, and newborn screenings. We're trying to take areas and be smarter. We don't need to recreate the wheel. We don't need to recreate how you treat a patient, but let's do it smarter. Let's do it more advanced and in a quicker manner if it's possible.
And innovation, beautiful. So I want to go back to that, idea that this patient-centric now takes cybersecurity, making more decisions with data-driven decisions. And the third part of that is, understanding what the needs are. So it is important. And part of the University of Miami Health System transformation roadmap is what Melissa just said, is let's get out of this comfort zone in the traditional medicine, taking it to look at what are the patients requiring and requesting. People hate to go sit at the doctor's office for 15, 20 minutes, an hour waiting for the doctor to see them. So we know that we got to get better at that. Diagnostics, we now test results is mandated. You have to see it, the patient can see it immediately. But it's not that, it's how are we really advancing and innovating these new technologies that are being asked of us. And I'm not a digital native. I'm in all sense, in all kidding aside, I came to this technology as an immigrant. I immigrated to technologies. And if we don't switch that mindset that I learned technology and I'm gonna stay here and this is what I learned, into what is changing in the world and how I need to evolve and transform, we're gonna be something that a mentor told me, do not be left out because you become irrelevant. And so when you become irrelevant, you don't support innovation and you don't support new tools and you don't have a saying on how. We're no longer the security team says, no, we're enablers of the business. So what Melissa said, all this is possible by us being more agile, by seeing what's coming, and by preparing ourselves to put security safeguards in place that are repeatable and not hindering innovation. So that's what I'm thinking about, and we're thinking about in the transformation plan.
Right. You can't be the department of no in security. It will never work.
My boss says, how do we get to yes, Mauricio? And every time somebody complains, I know that saying. And so very well. The beautiful thing is the communication with my boss is, time out, how do we get to yes? And I learned so many things of us working to get to yes than more a complex thing of trying to say no, or why is it not a good idea? So that's, how do we get to yes, Melissa?
Yeah, how do we get to yes? And velocity, I think, is the other term you probably hear a lot.
So what do you think are the next steps for cybersecurity and optimizing IT as we look at the next 10 years and all this new technology, all this new sensor-based management and biometric management? What do we think the next steps are?
What I would say, Michael, is, we've sort of skirted around it this entire conversation, but it's still the fundamentals. Just because the technology is changing and adapting and evolving doesn't mean that the security foundations change. You still need to be able to do your access management and privileged access management. You need to identify vulnerabilities. You need to know where your assets are. I know a big issue for HMH right now is that we never had a strong M&A playbook as it related to IT and IT security. So we're cleaning up a lot of sins of the past in terms of those practices, hospital locations that nobody took the time to say, let's get them standardized. And what does that standard look like? So before you can even worry about any of the next gen technology and all the fancy fun things that people like to talk about, it's really the foundation of how do you set standards for your organization from a technology perspective, a process perspective, so that when it comes time that there are these new sexy toys in the industry, it's just how do we bring them into the environment? It's not creating chaos and net new processes.
Melissa, I'm gonna piggyback on that. There's an article, if anybody cares, I wrote a few years ago in LinkedIn. You can my LinkedIn account called "Back to Basics," and Melissa said it. Let's go back to basics. I think we're missing that. So one thing we do differently, I think I've heard from people, is every time there is a new compromise, a new breach, I bring my people, my team together to review what happened, how it happened, what were the control safeguards that did not work. And so by doing that, we learn more about are we either good, we need improvement, or we really going in the right direction. So to answer the question, why do I start there? It's irrelevant what you just said, but it's relevant. So now, how do we enable new technologies and moving forward, or new ideas and innovation with all these research that's happening at the University of Miami? We gotta be there, is by not making the same mistakes. I tell my team, I care about the past per se. Don't come to me and say in the past, this person, don't care. I just wanna move forward. Now, if your procedures, if your document work papers are solid, all you need to do is continue to do what you do best: assessment, recommendations, mitigation of risk, and risk can never be zero. So we need to understand what is our risk appetite, where our risks lie, and focus on those areas. Now we're bringing more technology than ever at the University of Miami. So what, it is important for me and my team and the technology team to be agile, to understand what the need is, and to have that paper that says security controls, medium, NIST 853, how do we apply that quickly? And I have conversations with the CISOs from the companies that are bringing the technology, and they understand what we said. They fill out our security. We don't call it a vendor risk management. We call it a vendor assessment, or, we're just trying to collect information about your practices because we have the security addendum. But we've been able to identify, do they have good practices? Do they have solid practice? Where are we gonna get hit if there's something goes wrong with this vendor? So that's are the things that I'm trying to get my team to do, and more agile, and not live in the past where people are not listening to me. They made this mistake. Is how do we make people to, what I say, drink our Kool-Aid and be able to understand that we have a job to do, is protect the organization. And ultimately, the reason I work in healthcare, I work with a passion for patient care and patient safety. And that's always in my mind, is nothing happened to that patient, and that they get the care that they need from our healthcare workers.
That's an excellent point. It is about patient safety, right? As Melissa knows, one of the famous quotes is, we care. When we look at CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, a physician and a clinician will sacrifice confidentiality, integrity for availability every day and twice on Sunday, because it's about patient care. It's about the patient safety and the patient management piece. And so as we move to these biomedical areas and biomedical sensoring, at-home acute care treatment, continuous monitoring, we're adding great care to the patient. We're adding safety for the patient because we can better treat the patient. We're adding so much complexity in the data we're collecting, how we have to secure it, where it goes, and how we have to treat it. And it just exponentially continues to grow the complexity of what we're dealing with in healthcare today. It's a leading issue. So,
Michael,
yeah,
I want to leave everybody with a thought. It's cybersecurity, whatever you call it these days, information assurance, security, or cybersecurity. And I want everybody to really, understand what I'm going to say, because are we creating a denial of service against our patients?
Right.
And we got to be very careful. And Melissa and I, when we met, we hit it on really well, because we think the same way. But are we? Because we're the Department of No, or because we don't know, or because we are afraid to say, I don't know, and we go get help? But are we creating a denial of service on our patients? And that's one thing I want to, everybody here to remember. If anything else, is, are we the cause of that denial of service?
You're right. We have to be part of innovation every part of the way, right? And we can't be the no department. We have to be the yes, but how can we make it work safely and confidently in our environment to protect the patient as well?
And to Mauricio's point, don't be embarrassed to ask your peers, what are you doing? How are you tackling this problem? You don't have to have all of the answers. You don't have to be solving every aspect of security in healthcare. Look at your peers and make those relationships and start to share information around, here's what we're doing. Here's sort of the trouble that we've run into to date, or here's the success that we've seen so far. We can share the documents with you, the project plans, whatever will help you also be successful. Because at the end of the day, whether they're a patient for Hackensack Meridian Health or University of Miami, the whole point is that the patients are getting the care they need. And that's what it comes down to.
I agree. And I don't think you two could have wrapped it up any better. You're absolutely 100% right. This is about how we're treating our patients, how we're protecting our patients, and how we're innovating all at the same time.
And how do we support innovation?
And how we support innovation. Yeah. Agreed. Thank you so much. This is a great discussion, and look forward to more of these in the future.
Thank you.